first page of your handout is Rav Kook's actual writing. It's from the Orot Hatorah. The next two pages are Rav Drori, Rav Tzvanya Drori, Adnei Vesim Shon, the Rashiv of Hesder in Kiryat Shmona. He wrote a pirush on the Orot Hatorah. You don't have all the pages of the explanation. Thank you, Rabbi Samit, for sharing the file. That'll make that easier for a lot of people. You don't have all the pages of Rav Drori's explanation to this piece of Rav Kook. It's just 2 pages of the numerous pages to this piece of Rav Kook. And I selected this Rav Kook today for numerous reasons. One, he talks about, there's a section in the Sefer called Teiras Eretz Yisrael. There's something called Teiras Eretz Yisrael, the study of Torah in Eretz Yisrael. The study of Torah in Eretz Yisrael is a different type of study than the study of Torah in Chutz La'aretz. So why did I pick that this week? Rebbeinu Shalom said to Avram Avinu, Lech lecha mi'atzcha miladcha bebeis avicha la'oretz asher eka. Leave everything behind and go to the land that I will show you. Rashi says, Lech lecha lahana oscha u'letayvascha. The Rebbeinu Shalom said to Avram Avinu, the first Jew who made Aliyah, the Rebbeinu Shalom said to him, this is going to be good for you. You're going to enjoy it. Lahana oscha. You're going to enjoy going to Eretz Yisrael. You're going to enjoy Eretz Yisrael. U'letayvascha. And it's also going to be for your good. Sometimes there are things that are done for our good that we don't enjoy. And there are things that we enjoy that are not always for our good. And the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Avram Avinu lech lecha. You're going to make Aliyah, and it's going to be lahana oscha u'letayvascha. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to benefit from it. You're going to enjoy it. It's going to be a hanoah, and it's going to be for your good. When we were learning the Orot Hatorah in Beis Tefillah, we learned part of this piece of Rav Kook. And as an introduction to this piece of Rav Kook, we read a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin was not scanned and distributed. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin of Chof Daled. The Gemara says, Gemara is explaining a pasuk in the Navi Zechariah. Zechariah says that, Rashi says in Zechariah, it's one of the hardest books of Nevi'im to understand. But there's a pasuk in Zechariah that says, and I took, v'ekachli, shnei maklos, I took 2 sticks in my hand, Zechariah says. Le'echad karasi Noam, 1 stick I called Noam. I live on Nachal Noam, so that's one of the sticks. Nachal Noam, the Noam is the pleasant stick. So Zechariah says, I took 2 sticks in my hand. 1 stick I called Noam, the pleasant stick. Ule'echad karasi chovlim. And the other stick I called the machablim. What do we call a machabel today in modern day Hebrew? A terrorist. Or a person does damage, a chovel. So think about the exact English word we want to use in the context of this Gemara. 1 stick, Zechariah says, is going to be called pleasant. And 1 stick we'll call overly aggressive. That's a euphemism for terrorists. But chovlim in modern day Hebrew is a terrorist. I don't think that's what Chazal was talking about when they used the word, when Zechariah used the word chovlim. A pleasant stick versus that overly aggressive mechutzev stick. And then Zechariah talks about what he did with the sticks. So the Gemara wants to know, what do these 2 sticks represent? A pleasant stick and an overly aggressive mechutzev stick. So Gemara says, Noam, it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Chof Daled. Now remember, Rabbi Isai, there's a Talmud Bavli, the Talmud that was authored in Bavel, Ravina Ravashi, the Babylonian Talmud, that explains the Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And there's a Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, which also explains the Mishnayos of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. except that Talmud was written in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan. So we have two Talmuds. We always focus on Bavli, which is a whole discussion in and of itself. We focus on Talmud Bavli, and that's authored in Bavel. So what I'm about to read to you is coming from Sanhedrin Chaf Daled Amud Aleph in Bavli. This is not Jerusalem scholars in the Talmud Yerushalmi commenting. This is Babylonian scholars in Bavel commenting about themselves. Self-reflection. Look at yourself in the mirror. And this is what the Babylonian scholars tell us. When Zechariah is holding two sticks in his hand, he says one stick is a pleasant stick, and one stick is an overly aggressive mechutzav stick. Noam, the pleasant stick represents Talmidei Chachamim shebe'eretz Yisrael. The pleasant stick represents Talmidei Chachamim who live in Eretz Yisrael. Sheman'imim zeh lozeh b'halacha. They are pleasant with each other in their halachic discussions. Halavai, that would be true today. We would have the Gula Shalem in a second. The Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael, when they understand what Torah is, and when they understand what Eretz Yisrael is, and they put those two things together, it's a Noam. They will be pleasant with each other. And so Zechariah is holding a stick in his hand. He says, this stick represents Noam. These are the Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael who are pleasant with each other in halacha. V'chayvlim, what's the second stick represent? The overly aggressive, we won't use terrorists, the overly aggressive, mechutzav type, Talmidei Chachamim. Elu Talmidei Chachamim shebebavel. Those are the Talmidei Chachamim that live in Bavel. Now the Babylonians are writing this about themselves. Elu Talmidei Chachamim shebebavel. Shemachabli zeh ezeh bahalacha. They aggressively, they fight with each other about the halacha. Rashi says, Machablim, Beloshin az v'chema, in a very arrogant and mad language, Makshin zelazer. That's how they learn. Aggressive, angry. Uvnei Eretz Yisrael noichen yachad. The Talmidei Chacham Eretz Yisrael are pleasant with each other. Umayinim yachdav, and they research and they go into the sugya together in a cooperative spirit. Umisakin zeh es divrei zeh, and each one helps the other one to be masakin his understanding, to fix his understanding. V'hashmua yoytz la'ar, and Torah comes out in a lit way from Eretz Yisrael, from the Talmidei Chacham Eretz Yisrael, when they learn Torah as Torah's Eretz Yisrael. This derech is become known as derech Torah's Eretz Yisrael, and that's what Rav Kook is talking about here. That's the introduction. In Parshas Bereishis, after the Baruch Shalom has the world created, and it talks about Gan Eden, it says that there were 4 rivers that came out of the Gan. One of the rivers, it says, went to, let me get the exact, one of the 4 rivers. It says that this river went to a place, and this place is a place where the gold was good. And that's where Rav Kook begins. Uzahav ha'oretz ha'hitov. Shem ha'echad Pishon, the first river that came out of Eden. The 4 rivers came out of Eden, and the first river is Pishon. It circles Eretz Chavila Asher Sham Hazor. Now Pishon, according to Rashi, is like the area of Egypt. And it says that there's gold there. Uzahav ha'oretz ha'hitov. The gold in this land is good. On those words, the Medrash comments as follows, and that's the beginning of Rav Kook. Uzahav ha'oretz hahitov, the gold in that land is good. Ein Torah ketoras Eretz Yisrael. That's in quotes. That's not Rav Kook writing. That's the Medrash. The Medrash says that when it says the gold in that land is good, it's a reference to Torah. The Torah in Eretz Yisrael, there's no other Torah like Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael. Ein Torah ketoras Eretz Yisrael. What does it mean, Ein Torah ketoras Eretz Yisrael? So Rav Kook writes, B'chol dor hayinu tzrichim l'chabeb harbe Toras Eretz Yisrael. Every generation should have had a special appreciation for what we call Toras Eretz Yisrael. It's the derech halimud of where two people can sit together and have a pleasant discussion and disagree. And through the disagreement, as Rashi explained, they're trying to work with each other to get to the light. What are we learning Torah for? We're learning Torah. Torah is the search for truth. A person that's searching for truth, when he realizes that he made a mistake, he goes, oh, thank you so much for bringing light into my life. I was about to go off and live a mistake, and I don't want to live a mistake. When two people are learning together, they're doing the most beautiful thing that a person can do in life. They're in the search of truth. And if someone can show, look, this is what the Gemara says, this is what Rashi says, this is what Tosa says, this is what Kiv Ega says, think about these things. According to what you're saying, this wouldn't work. According to what I'm saying, it does work. And the other person answers him, they're talking calmly. And by the end of the discussion, they're able to say, you know what? This is what it means. And now we know what we have to do with what we just learned. Now, their conclusion may not be objective truth either, but they're in the search of truth. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man in Search of Meaning. We need man in search of truth, which sometimes is the same thing as meaning. But we need man in search of truth. In Eretz Yisrael, man is in search of truth, as Rav Kook is going to explain. And that's Toras Eretz Yisrael. When two people are fighting in an angry, chutzpahdik, arrogant way, that what they're trying to do is prove they're right. It's for themselves. I want to win, and I want to prove to my chavrusa I'm right. I'm smarter. I got the sugya better than he did. That results in this kind of angry type of learning together because it's about you. The objective search for truth does not need to be yelled and screamed and be arrogant about it. It's two people talking nicely and understanding that each of them have the same common goal. Reuven's not trying to prove he's smarter than Shimon, and Shimon's not trying to prove he's smarter than Reuven. Both of them, Reuven and Shimon, are sitting around the table and they're saying, can you help me find the truth? This is what I think it is based upon what I learned. What do you think? Did I make a mistake? Is there somewhere that I need to be corrected? Am I off base? Please help me. I'm in search of the truth. And such a chavrusa brings, as Rashi says, light to the world, because man is in search of truth. Man's not in search of victory. So the Medrash says, "Uzahav ha'oretz hahitov." The gold in this land in Eretz Yisrael is good. Ein Torah k'Toras Eretz Yisrael. There's no Torah like the Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael. B'chol dor Rav Kook writes, every generation should have had a special appreciation of Toras Eretz Yisrael, of how they learned Torah in Eretz Yisrael. How much more we need this in our generation. Rav Kook is writing this in the 20s and the 30s. Dar hanavila v'hatachiyah. In the 20s and the 30s, and the same thing is true today, it's a dar hanavila v'hatachiyah. We're in a very confused state here. There are people, children, going off the derech, and there's a tremendous doorway in of Balei Tshuva. The door is going out and the door is going in. It's a nevila. We're losing people, and it's a tchiyah. We're gaining balei tshuva, and we can't figure out if Torah has become so prominent and people respect the Torah in such a fantastic way that people are coming back to Torah. Why is there also a door going out and people are leaving the Torah? So we're in a door nevila tchiyah. It's novel. There are people falling off the cliff and people coming back into the frame. Ben Hazman shel ha'afeira v'ha'ora. It's a time, Rav Kook's writing this in his time. It's a time where there's so much darkness, and on the other side, there's so much light. Hayiyush, there's so much yiyush, there's so much loss of hope. V'hagavura, and yet so much energy and power to move forward. B'shvilo, in this such a generation, anu tzrichem sam chayim, we need the potion, the medicine of life. Dafka mi Torahs Eretz Yisrael. Dafka from Torahs Eretz Yisrael. Anu, we're going to see why Torahs Eretz Yisrael is the potion for this. Anu tzrichem laharas lo es ha'emes v'habihira sheyesh bo yitzarenu eliki. We must have the ability to demonstrate to people the emes and the behirus, the truth, the clarity that we have in the treasure chest of God's Torah. We offer you truth. We offer you clarity. Listen. Now, today we're in a generation where aznaim lahem v'lo yishma'u, and that's a question in itself. How do we get, to a generation where the ears are so stuffed you can't even get their attention? And for that, Rav Kook has an answer also. But we need what we're projecting to the world and projecting to our other Yiddelach is listen. Ta'amu u'u ki tov Hashem. Open your mouth. Let me give you a little. You'll taste it. It's sweet. It's a Torah's chayim. It's a Torah of life. V'deoseo v'hegenoseo shel Torahs emes. V'sayofa niskav. Hanoam v'hod sheyesh v'mitzvosei ha'maisis. Uveteir haliches kayim kulam she'alpia uveseicha. It's a way of life. We have to stop using Torah as an intellectual process. The intellectual process is we sit down and we learn, and we're going to fight with each other until one of us proves the other wrong. I understand Rabbi Akiva better than you. I got Rabbi Akiva's teretz, you didn't get his teretz. You don't understand Rashi, you don't understand the Taisus. And then we have all this information that we gathered over a year or 2 years. We say we're Talmidei Chachamim. We have a tremendous amount of knowledge. We don't have to talk much about how many Talmidei Chachamim each of us runs into that we say, I don't understand. How can he do what he just did? How can he say what he just said if he's a Talmud Chacham? How can he conduct his life like that if he's a Talmud Chacham? We've had enough stories like that. And the answer is because the Torah was knowledge, and the Torah wasn't Torah's Chaim. It wasn't the Torah to teach you how to live. It was a Torah to give you a bigger brain so you can show off you're smarter than someone else. Well, there are mathematicians that are smarter than each other. There are physicists that are smarter than each other. This person has more Torah in his brain than someone else. This person has more math in his mind than someone else. This person has more physics in his mind than someone else. And we understand it's a very long road, not an impossible road, but it's a very long road from geometry to being a Oived Hashem. I understand geometry so well that it's bringing me closer to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Yachol, anything in the world can bring you close to the Rebbeinu Shalom. But then there is the long roads, the medium roads, and the shorter roads. Torah is boom. Torah, when studied properly, is the Derech HaChaim. It's the way of life. It's the way of Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls it Derech Hashem. It's the path of Hashem. So we have to stop using the Torah as an intellectual process, which results in the Bavel Torah of Chayvlin. And I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. You're not B'Kairis, you're this, you're that, I'm this, I'm that, I'm right, you're wrong. I have to stop. And we have to become noyam, pleasant. What do you mean? What do I mean? And if I'm wrong, please show me I'm wrong. Because we're here to find the truth. And the truth is how we're going to live life. Man in search of truth. How are we going to find truth? How are we going to live a true life? How our Torah is not only true, but it's also life. It's the Torah of life and the Torah of truth. For this, we have to give people the taste. If you, sometimes you go to the ice cream store, children come and they say, can I taste that before I buy it? And the person will give them a spoon. And can I taste that and buy it? And taste that before I buy it and give them a spoon, they'll taste it. The ones that they like, they buy. The ones that they don't like, they don't buy. And if there's bad ice cream there, it's a bad idea to give it to someone to taste. We have to have a way that we, as the Pasuk says, Ta'amu uki Tov Hashem. Taste it. We have to be able to teach Torah and give off the aura that Torah is sweet and pleasant. It's not just an intellectual study, and it's not just a bunch of rules and statutes. It's a way of a pleasant life. This cannot be felt, and this cannot be lived in Eretz Yisrael. This can only happen in Eretz Yisrael. Now, why can this only happen in Eretz Yisrael? Okay. On page 480, which is the second page of the scan, the right-hand page of the column is a phrase from Rav Kook that we just read, and the left-hand column is Rav Drori Admei Versem Shana, his commentary. So Rav Drori writes as follows: L'Torahs Eretz Yisrael shnei ma'ap yonim hanitzrochim ha'oy b'yameinu. There are two facets to Torahs Eretz Yisrael that is very much needed today: emes, truth, ubehirus, and clarity. Anoshim lo mistapkim b'rayonot hamuva'im b'loshin samalit medrashim. People today are not that interested in these ideas, symbolic ideas, and medrashim that are purely symbolic. Hem einam minyonim l'shmoa sismaot. They're not interested in code words. Mevakshim heim hesberim hanoigim l'chayim. People are desperate for explanations so they can understand life. People are desperate to understand what is this matzav in the world. Explain to me how God's running the world. People are desperate for really a das tavunos. They're desperate to understand life and how God's running the world. Can you please teach me how Torah absolutely is nogay in my life? What I see Torah is a bunch of guys learning in the yeshiva that have no connection to the outside world. They're not even interested in talking to the outside world. They're not interested in understanding the outside world. They're completely isolated from the outside world. How is that kind of environment and study going to Me'ira Es Darkai? How will that enlighten my lifestyle? I live outside the base medrash. I go to work every day. I have a wife and a family. I don't live between the four walls of the base medrash. Can someone explain to me how what's going on in the base medrash can actually light up my life and be nagaya me in every facet of my life? When the ideas of Torah are said in a way that are completely uprooted from just simple logic and understanding, even if you, Reb Chaim Briska, Reb Akiva Eiger, you can say it loud and you can yell it, but if you can't develop these ideas beyond the idea and show that the idea is relevant to someone's life, they will not be able to settle in the hearts of the people of our generation. And this is Rav Drori now writing. Children young people, old people, they're starving, they're craving for an understanding, an understanding of the Torah that's a guide to life. You have all these things. I get these emails, as I always say, this course and that course. This person is teaching coaching, life coaching this, life coaching that. People are teaching how to live. People are teaching how to raise your children. People are teaching how to stay married. People are teaching how to run your finances. Things that our parents grew up and figured out how to parent. And today, of course, people go to their therapist, whatever, and they explain to their therapist how terrible their parents were. Different discussion. But our parents, they somehow raised children. They somehow regulated finances. They somehow kept the house together. And suddenly today, we have everybody being taught everything. This is how you raise your children. This is how you run your finances. And this is how you keep your shalom bayis. And Nebuch, we have a generation where the divorce rate is skyrocketing with all the shalom bayis classes. And Nebuch, we have all kinds of problems that we didn't have when people were teaching us how to not to have the problems. So when we weren't taught how not to have the problems, we had less problems. And now that everyone's teaching us how to avoid the problem, we have all these problems. So if we can offer to people in a Torah-dic way, not package it with some PR, if we can actually teach Torah, Rashi, Ramban, Gemara, and say when we're teaching, okay, we just learned this Gemara, we just learned this Rashi, we just learned this Ramban. Stop. What am I going to do with it now? How am I going to make this applicable to the way I live every day? I mention this all the time. The Igeres HaRamban, right? Supposed to read it once a week. Ramban says it'll bring tremendous things to your life. One of the things the Ramban wrote in the Igeres of the Ramban to his son says, when you stand up from reading a sefer, you learn for an hour, you close the sefer, and you're going to move on to the next thing. Before you move on to the next thing, think for a moment, is there something that you just learned that you can actually live, you can make relevant in your life? That is called Torah's Chayim. That is the life, that is the Torah that lives. It's not the Torah that's in your brain full of information, it's the Torah that you're living. You'll learn something, what can you do with it? I learned how to treat people differently. I learned how to act differently. I learned how to think differently. I learned how to put on, when people learn, they think, oh, I learned, now I know better how to put on my tefillin. Oh, I learned, I know what I can't do on Shabbos better. Oh, I learned, now I know that I can do this on Shabbos, I can't do this on Shabbos. How about walking away from learning and saying, oh, I learned this, now I understand that I should not do this or say this to another person. Or this is what I should do for another person. How about walking away from learning that way? Or I have now a better understanding of how God's running the world. I have a better understanding of what my tachlis in the world is. How about thinking about those things sometimes, which come way before all the other nice things, which we'll get to in Me'etz Hashem. So this is called Torah's Chayim. The Torah is not studied for an intellectual prowess. It's studied for life. It's studied so that I can live it. Now, Rav Drori explains, V'omnam Torah kazu, this kind of Torah, Yechayil litzmoyach rak be'eretz Yisrael. This kind of Torah that we're describing can only grow in Eretz Yisrael. The Medrash says, Ein Torah k'Torah's Eretz Yisrael. It's the best gold in the world. There's no gold like the gold in Eretz Yisrael. There's no Torah like the Torah is in Eretz Yisrael. Because as the Gemara explained in Sanhedrin, it's Noam. It's pleasant. We're searching for the truth. We're not fighting over things so that we can show that we're better than others. That's Torah's Eretz Yisrael. That Torah only happens in Eretz Yisrael. This is home. The Rebbeinu Shalom said to Avram, Lech lecha mi'atzcha milad me'savich ha'aretz asher eka. The Rebbeinu Shalom said to Avram Avinu, I want you to know something. Lech lecha mi'atzcha, leave this land. This is not your land. Get out. Miladetcha, you were born here, but you need to leave. This is not going to be considered your birthplace anymore. Your Beis Avicha. This is not your Beis Avicha anymore. You're going to a new place. That place will be called Maladetcha, Eretz Avicha, Artzecha. That's the place that's going to be your home. It's going to be more, how can it be his birthplace? He wasn't born there. It will become his birthplace. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow in the Parsha here. It will be your birthplace. You'll become attached to Eretz Yisrael. It will be your birthplace. It will be your land. It will be the home of your father. But Terach never got there. How can it? It will be the home of your father. Every single comfort that you have from the culture you're leaving, I will bring with you in the suitcase of Aliyah. You're going to bring Beis Avicha, you're going to bring my Ladetcha, you're going to bring everything is going to come with you when you come to Eretz Yisrael. This is the Mokum Tivi for a Yid. This is the natural landing spot for every Jew. Maral, we talk about so often, Netzach Yisrael, Perek Aleph, a Jew in Chutz La'aretz is an absolutely abnormal situation. If you see water running up a hill, that's what you're looking at when you see a Jew in Chutz La'aretz. It's abnormal for water to run up a hill. The teva is it runs downhill. The teva is a Jew is Netzach. If you see a Jew in Chutz La'aretz, something going wrong. Something abnormal. Ukvi shekasev harav le'elu tzricha Eretz Yisrael liyas benuya v'chol Yisrael yoshim lehem usudor v'chol sevrei mikdash u'malchus kun u'nevuah shem shroik v'chol tastem as chayi Torah shebal peh v'chol ziv tefarta. We do this every day in a certain sense, and we'll continue with this with Kook next week. Tafshin Pei Aleph. Mashiach should come today, mamish. We're already getting ready for Shemitah next year. And yet Shem, we may start Masech the Shavuos after we make the same on Shkolim next week. What do you do with Shemitah in Chutz La'aretz? The answer is you can learn Masech the Shavuos, but you can't do anything with it. You can't live Shavuos. In Eretz Yisrael, what do you do during Shavuos? Do you use the Hatorah? Do you not? Without fighting. We're in Eretz Yisrael without fighting. Taivas Eretz Yisrael. Saimach on the Hatorah? No, I'm not Saimach on the Hatorah. I hold that you need Yevul Nachri. Oh, you need Yevul Nachri from Eretz Yisrael. I don't use Yevul Nachri from Eretz Yisrael. I use Yevul Chutz La'aretz. Okay. All kinds of shittas. When we get into Shavuos, Shavuos is going to be a daily subject almost in everyone's home. Where did the fruit come from? Where did the vegetables come from? What makolet I can buy in? What supermarket I can buy in? What's the hashgacha for this year? And we have a whole new language coming up next year. And when I have leftover fruits that have kedusha Shavuos, what do I do with them? And then the Shas Habir is going to come. We'll learn about that in Yetcha. What do I do Shas Habir with those fruits, wine, etc. that I have when the beer comes up? And the beer can come up in the 8th year. What do I do? So we're going to all have to learn a whole new language, and not a language, an intellectual language. You can't live in Eretz. You can't live in Eretz unless you talk the language. Trumas Maisus. So all of us, we go to the supermarket, we see the sign, the dots, they took off the Trumas Maisus, or Rafrati took off Trumas Maisus. Well, it's a beautiful thing to learn Trumas Maisus. If you have fruits growing or vegetables growing in your backyard, and you want to eat them, you have to know some Hilchas Trumas Maisus. So Trumas Maisus is not some kind of intellectual thing. Oh, I learned Masechta Trumas, and I know the laws. But what are you going to do with them? Nothing. I live in Borough Park. If you live here in Eretz Yisrael, Trumas Maisus is not a learning. It's a way you live. You can't live without the language of Trumas Maisus. You can't live without the language of Shemitah, etc., etc. The Torah comes to life here. And even if you leave these laws of Kedushas Karka, we understand that when you come to Eretz Yisrael, a Yontif, a Chol Moyed, it's a whole different thing here than a Chutz La'aretz. You're living as a Yid here. You're not living in Golus and practicing Judaism. You're in Eretz Yisrael. You're living the life of a Yid. You're not practicing Judaism. This is Yiddishkeit. Eretz Yisrael is Yiddishkeit. This is where Yidden live. This will be developed more by Rav Drury. We'll see more about this next week. Toras Eretz Yisrael, the Chachmei Bavel. The Babylonian Talmud quotes it. The Babylonian Talmud says that stick that was called Noam, those are Talmidei Chacham in Eretz Yisrael. That stick that was called Chayvlim, that's the stick of Talmidei Chacham in Bavel. So we want to be able to enhance our lives through Torah, through the Torah's Chayim, not the Torah of intellectualism, but after we learn Torah, we say, I'm in Eretz Yisrael now. This is not Torah of a bookshelf. I don't want to just know it. I want to live it, because Eretz Yisrael is at home, and we all live at home, and we want to know how to live at home. We want to know how to live in our house. How you live in our house? Ooh, there's a whole set of rules of how you live in your house. Eretz Yisrael is our house, and it comes with a whole set of rules, not intellectual rules that we can fight about, I'm right, you're wrong, but a whole set of rules about how to live correctly, how to live a life of truth. All those here need Yeshua, should have Yeshuas. All you need Refuah, Refuahs. All you need Nechamas, Nechamas. All you need that need Baruch, all the brachas from the B'nai Shalom. Yeshua's Nechamas, brachas, Refuahs only can come through the B'nai Shalom. Refuah Shalema to Moshe Zelig, Ben Rezel, B'Sayr Shachar Yisrael. With all those who are Chayli Corona, Sof Shachar Yisrael. Yeshua's Refuah's Nechamas, brachas only come through the B'nai Shalom. We do our shtadlus. We need the Rebbe Shalom's bracha for each of these things to happen. That's our Gili Hayichud. When we internalize this and understand this, we bring about a Gili Hayichud in our own lives. And with every person that does this, there's a greater Gili Hayichud of the Rebbe Shalom in the world. And then Mashiach Tzidkenu has the door open for him to finish the work that we started of the Gili Hayichud. And Hashem, we can then go to the Harabayis, to Beis Hamikdash, and bring the Korbanos we learned about Masech the Talmud, and bring Matzah Shekem we learned about in Masech the Shkolim. Mashiach Tzidkenu should come from here. We made a mamish today. Misha Amar L'Tzoris, Misha Amar Shalom L'Lamidai Yemadai L'Tzoris Seinu. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful day. Mi'at Hashem, tomorrow we have at 9:30 the Gemara Shir, at 10:15 Das Tvunos, at 10:45 Parsha. Parsha is Lech Lecha. Those of us who made Aliyah, it's a parsha that you really want to think about and learn well. The first Jew, Avraham Avinu, was told to make Aliyah. He successfully made that Aliyah, and we have much to learn from Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imeinu's Aliyah. We'll talk a bit about that tomorrow, and several other things that have come to mind this week. I don't know what Shmira Halacha Mimakora means, but I do know who Rav Rimon is. He writes wonderful Svarim on Halacha. In fact, he wrote a very, very wonderful compilation of Hilchos Shemitah with pictures, explanations, charts. He does a wonderful job. Everybody have a wonderful day. Sei gesund.